Well, again, good afternoon, everyone. Um, we'll wait a couple more minutes here as folks continue to file in before we dive into the HAPO Open Forum this afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I think the waiting room has kind of slowed down a little bit, so let's go ahead and jump in. And welcome to this month's HAPO Open Forum. For those who I haven't met yet, I'm Joel Matson. I'm the manager of the Housing Accountability and Production Office. Excited to be here with you this afternoon. With I think the whole HAPO team is here, but we'll be hearing from a couple of our HAPO teammates, Sean Edging and Lauren Dressen, um, in a brief presentation this afternoon, and then we'll certainly allow for time for questions and discussion at the end of our brief presentation. So, um, Emily, if you could go to the next slide. And just for framing this discussion this afternoon, I want to highlight that we'll be first discussing and sharing out about the Housing Planning Assistance Program that we have in partnership with the Housing Division here. We'll talk more about the HAPO Technical Assistance Program specifics, give a brief overview of our office, then dive into inquiries and complaints and do a walkthrough of the intake form that our office is utilizing to navigate those inquiries or complaints of potential housing law violations. And then again, leave some time for discussion at the end. So with that brief summary, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Ethan.
Hey,
Yeah, Sean.
Joel, just really quickly, are we recording this? If not, oh yeah, we are. Okay,
Thanks.
great, perfect. Just
Yep.
checking.
Yep. Thanks, Sean. And again, I'll hand it over to you, Ethan, to dive in here on the Housing Planning Assistance Program.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. And hi, everyone. My name is Ethan Stugwang. I manage the housing division here at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Here today to talk a little bit about the housing planning assistance, technical assistance grant funds for local governments. And I think Sean is going to kind of help tie both the housing division technical assistance with the HAPO technical assistance, even though, what I'll talk about here is, a dedicated pot of funding for housing planning. It's also kind of seamlessly, hopefully seamlessly being deployed out to folks with the HAPO technical assistance. So in terms of housing planning technical assistance, the total amount is $5 million for Goal 10 and Goal 14 implementation work. Those are things like housing capacity analysis, housing production strategy, code audits, tribal housing planning, UGB work, urban reserve planning, those kinds of things. There's also an additional $1.5 million available for local governments to update their codes to comply with the middle housing provisions in recently passed House Bill 2138. The application period for all of that technical assistance pot is open right now, actually. We're halfway through that application period, and the application deadline is August 4th of 2025. So just under a month left to go on that application timeline. So be sure to get those grant applications in. And then who am I actually talking to here? This is for cities, counties, tribal government, and regional entities. So those are the governmental agencies that are eligible for applying for these housing planning assistance. This is work that local governments would do to comply with those housing planning related activities. That's the high level overview. Sean, I might pass this off to you, but I'm also happy to answer any questions if we have any on this portion of that.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Ethan. And if we can move to the next slide. So one thing to just kind of keep in the back of your minds as you're preparing the applications for the pot of funding that Ethan mentions is that also there's a separate pot of funding that the HAPO administers, that is going to be kind of part and parcel of that application process, but also serves a distinct purpose for what our office is intended to do. So just so you know, if you're a local government thinking about submitting an application, we basically just made it one process. You can submit that application to the DLCD Housing Division. That's the most important thing to know. And we'll figure out basically which funding source it ought to come from based on the specifics of the project and our funding authority, all those types of things. But just so folks understand that there is a separate pot of funding that is specifically for technical assistance to local governments for different issues. Now, this pot of funding is for a narrower subset of work than what Ethan mentioned around, kind of goal 10, goal 14 planning. It's much more flexible and can be used for a variety of projects, whereas the HAPO Assistance Fund, it's narrower. It's only for local governments, and it's only to do very specific things like complying with housing laws, reducing permitting and land use barriers to housing production, and to support implementation of local procedures and standards relating to the approval of residential projects. Now, one thing I do want to emphasize is that we have kind of developed a document, a more detailed document talking about how we administer this fund, how we will kind of participate in the making sure that we connect local governments with the assistance that they need to comply with housing laws, and how we're kind of operationalizing that statutory direction. We covered this in a previous webinar, actually, on kind of the different policies and procedures documents that we talked about. I'll paste this document just in the chat so that way folks have access to it and are able to, kind of refer to it. But basically, the thing you need to know as a local government for the purposes of this application process is just tell us what you need, tell us what work you're trying to do, and then from there we'll figure out, all right, what makes sense to fund from each source, right? So with that, I think that's basically it on the HAPO technical assistance. Joel, yeah, this might be a good time to pause for questions on that.
Perfect. I was just going to suggest the same because I don't know if we'll have Ethan for the whole time here this afternoon, but let's take a minute in the case folks have some specific questions on the opportunity that's in front of us right now for the Housing Planning Assistance Program. We'll pause there, and please feel free to use the raise hand function if it's on here, or just go ahead and come off mute, and happy to try to address your question here this afternoon. Certainly, you can be thinking about those questions throughout the rest of the brief presentation here, and I know we'll have time at the end to dive into more discussion and questions as well, but I'll pause a little bit longer before we move forward with the presentation, rest of our presentation, in case there are questions about the Housing Planning Assistance Program. Lauren, why don't you go ahead and keep us going on the presentation here this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lauren Dressen. I am the lead housing navigator within the Housing Accountability and Production Office. So just this might be a familiar slide. We've been showing this in lots of different spaces, and I think in previous open forums, but just for folks who are new, or maybe just as a reminder, because it's been a couple of months since we had our last open forum, just sort of what the purpose of our office is. We're really here to support developers and cities in boosting housing production. In a sentence, that's what we're here to do. It's really important to our office, and we've talked about this a lot, is we are approaching our work from a collaborative perspective first and enforcement last. Although that we do have the ability to do enforcement, we want to try everything before that, and that being a last resort, if you will. So the nice thing is that Sean and Ethan already talked about that center thing there, the technical assistance and funding for local governments. The other kind of two two of the other things that we're really focused on is ensuring that we're meeting state housing law and local land use code, and decisions are meeting that. So, and then we also are responsible for sort of research and guidance to reduce barriers to housing production. So this can be things like interagency coordination. This can be providing technical assistance, written guidance. All of those sorts of things kind of fall within the purview if it's within the housing production pipeline. So a few just we're gonna take a look at the intake form that launched last week on July 1st. But just as a reminder, what are sort of those inquiry categories that might be appropriate to come in through this intake form? And there are kind of four high level. So informal land use guidance. I know that we have been fielding a fair amount of informal land use guidance and building code guidance prior to July 1st. And so that's going to just continue. It's just, it will be submitted through an intake form. And then kind of I think the really big change that has occurred with July 1 being sort of the launch of our office is the formal housing law complaint responsibility of our office. That's really the biggest change. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in the intake form. And then certainly if there's questions about that process as opposed to just more general or informal inquiries, we can certainly get into that afterwards. And then the last piece is housing navigation. So kind of everything that falls outside of that. So things like, hey, I am curious what funding sources might be available for my project, or I need to know who to talk to about a complicated environmental regulation, and I'm not sure who to talk to. Hapo's here to help field those types of questions and get people connected to the right folks, maybe in other state agencies, if it's not appropriate for us to answer the question. So we're just kind of here to be a central intake place for a whole lot of things and help either answer the question within our own office or get you connected to the right people. And just a quick kind of just some examples of housing laws, and I will not read all of these to you, but here's some examples of both land use on the land use side of housing laws that you may be going, hey, is there a potential violation of one of these? And then we've got some examples of building code laws in place as well. So this is not not a complete list, I'm sure, but just some good examples. And Sean, I see you're off mute, so if you want to add anything here, please feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a note for everybody, so Emily provided in the chat a link to our intake form for inquiries and complaints. That not only includes both of the documents that I was talking about, the policies and procedures that kind of go into more detail in this process that Lauren's kind of summarizing at the high level, but it also does include a more comprehensive list of housing laws. And the main thing I just want to add here is that as an office, especially on the implementation of housing laws, the bill, Senate Bill 1537, defines a very specific scope for the Housing Accountability and Production Office. It's not everything that's related to housing. It's not a lot of areas of law that are not part of DLCD's or BCD's statutory authority. We have a very defined set of things that we are experts on, things that we're directed to really follow up on. So one thing that means is that we're not going to be able to necessarily be a full resource for every housing law that exists, or even all issues that relate to housing. I think one of the most common ones that we've run into just doing this kind of informally are things like public facilities, right? So like when you have, say, infrastructure that's being planned for a particular area, we're not the experts on that. But what we can do is to try to be a resource to help navigate different complexities with the information that we have available to us. So I think this is something I want to kind of highlight. These laws here are examples of things that we are directed to very specifically be kind of a resource on the compliance of, both specific to land use and housing, as well as building codes and housing. Also on that link that Emily provided, we also have a document that kind of goes into the more technical details about like, all right, well, what are housing laws? Like what specifically is in there, at least on the land use side. And I know our colleagues at the Building Codes Division has similar guidance on their end as well. But that will definitely go into a lot more detail about the types of laws that we have expertise and specialization in. But yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to add to Lauren's point.
Thanks, Sean. And I will, that kind of flags something for me on the housing navigation side. What we see is individual people coming in looking for rent assistance or things like that. That is not within our purview. But we, again, would connect people to the correct person who can help them with that. But individual assistance is not kind of the housing navigation's purpose. So I will go to the next slide here. So again, as of July 1st, so last Tuesday, we are officially open, although we've been informally assisting folks since January. We are now available to take those formal complaints, and it is really the big change here. So I'm going to pop open our intake form here. And I think, yeah, Emily dropped, I believe, I can't see the chat, but I believe Emily dropped the link to our website where you can find this form and submit to us. So be open here so we can make it a little bit bigger. So I guess I just want to start by saying around the intake form that please don't be shy about submitting inquiries. And if you are unsure about whether it's something that should come to us, but you need some assistance, please submit it and we will help route you to the correct place, whether it's with us or we go, hey, this is actually better suited for another agency to help you with. Just a reminder too that submissions don't have to be perfect. If we get you routed to the correct person within either the DLCD side or the building code side, if there are bits of information that you weren't sure about or that we need to either answer your question or route you to the correct person, we will ask those questions and help you get there. So it doesn't need to be a perfect submission. It's perfectly okay to put unsure or not applicable. There's options in there if you aren't sure on something. So please submit it. And if it doesn't have all the information, we will follow up with additional questions. So I'll just walk through quickly here. So we have some very general questions. We want to know who you are and what organization you're from and what type of organization. Obviously, contact information is going to be really important, so we can either follow up with you with additional questions or, provide written guidance to you. It may be a question that is pertaining to a certain city. So we'll ask, what city is this pertaining to? That will help us understand where we're looking. If you have the ability to select multiple cities and multiple counties, if that is a need. And I think, those are pretty general standard questions when you're filling out a form. The really important kind of first question that we have here is the nature of your inquiry. And so this is really, as I'm talking about routing submissions to the right people, this is the question that really helps us understand which team is this going to, so that we can assign kind of the person who's best suited to answer that question for you. And so you'll see we have got building codes, land use and planning, and navigation of state policies and programs, and then other general question, which we assume we won't get a ton of those, that most questions will be within one of those three top categories. So I want to show too, under the building codes and land use and planning, once you select that, you will get this prompt here around a state housing law violation. And so we've talked about this is our more formal process of an alleged violation of housing law. And so this question is really critical for indicating how our office is going to kind of move forward with the process. And it's very different than a more informal process. And so, the selection of yes on this is going to generate additional questions. Asking you to explain in more detail what your complaint is, selecting to the best of your the best of your knowledge and understanding. And again, this is where it does not need to be a perfect submission. We don't expect folks who are submitting to be experts in housing law. That is what our housing law team is here to help navigate. And so doing your best to select the options, and it might be more than one, and you can certainly select more than one. Do your best guess, and then as our team is working with you, we'll get more clear about what that potential housing law violation is through the materials you submit or through conversations that our team may be having with you. And then this is a really, I want to point this out because I know, and this is not my area of expertise. So if Sean, if I get something wrong, please feel free to jump in. But this question around legal action is really, really important, because that is another thing that really indicates to our office how we can move forward in assisting you. If you have moved to where you're filing an appeal or moving into a legal space, that really changes the way that we can interact. That question being required and providing a bit more information, it will, if you say yes here, we'll ask for a bit more information. And that's really going to indicate to our office how we move forward with you, whether we're moving into a full complaint process or we're more of kind of, we can provide you some guidance, but mostly have to take more of a back seat in that case. Sean, I'm like, did I?
Yeah, if I could just put an addendum on that. So, or like building on that point. So Senate Bill 1537, it has a provision in there that kind of limits how the office may be involved when there's kind of an active appeal. And this goes for both local governments and developers. So when there's an appeal of a land use decision or something like that to say LUBA, or there's private litigation involving a particular development project, we're basically limited in terms of how we can interact with that case. We're actually not allowed to even provide guidance. What we can do are provide certain things like voluntary optional mediation. We can provide technical assistance to a local government that's not related to that issue. We're also able to submit agency briefs, which is kind of more of like a typical thing that agencies are allowed to do in the land use process, but not actually participate or provide guidance in that particular case. So that's just something that's important for us to know, right? If there's any litigation happening or any notice of intent to appeal that's been applied, that we're very limited. So we need to know that information soon. So yeah, that's the only clarification I'd add to that, Lauren.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. So popping down here a little bit further, we will ask a question about, is this a general question or is this regarding a specific development? And so if you select yes, that, hey, this is, I'm a developer, I'm working on this very specific development, and I have questions pertaining to that. An additional series of questions will kind of open up, asking about the specifics around that development. So, where are you at in the process with your local jurisdiction? Have you submitted permit or application? The address or tax law ID? What type of housing? Is it rental or home ownership? What's the construction type? Number of units, affordability, and are there any public resources in that project as well? And so there's a variety of reasons why we ask these questions. Some of it is to better understand the urgency of the response. So if it is an active development, making sure that we're aware of that. It's also going to be really critical for us to be able to report on the work that our office is doing and being very transparent about what we're doing. From the navigation side of the house too, if somebody comes in and they're looking for, maybe they are looking for some resources and want to be connected with programs that might work well with their development, having these bits of information about what type of project it is will help our team have some ideas of programs that may be well suited to pair with your project. So there are a lot of reasons. And I want to point out, the office name is Housing Accountability Production Office, and that accountability piece is not only external, but that's also for us internally to be accountable for our work and be very transparent about the work that we're doing. And so having the ability to show data around what types of projects we're assisting with is really critical for us to share that publicly with folks. So that is, that's kind of a general overview of the process. And of course, depending on which sort of branch of the tree you go down, you'll be asked slightly different questions. But ultimately, you'll be asked these specific development questions on any pathway that you choose. It's critical information, regardless of whether you're coming from a building code side or you're coming from land use and planning or a housing navigation side. That's critical information for us to be able to best assist you. So once you hit submit, hit submit here, it will alert the proper team that, hey, we have a new submission, and we will get that assigned to the person who can most quickly respond to you and is best suited to respond to you. And then once it gets into the process, it'll be kind of a communication with that assigned person. If they have follow-up questions, they'll reach out to you directly for follow-up questions. If it's a simple, hey, we know how to respond to this, we'll respond to you directly. The person who submitted the email that's on file that is submitted will receive status updates throughout the process so that you are kept aware of where your case is at any given moment. And so, be on the lookout for those as well. We want to make sure that folks aren't having to reach out and go, hey, what status is my case in, that you will receive those notifications as it happens immediately. So I think we will stop there, and I'll see if anyone else on HAPO team wants to add anything or anything that I missed that you think is critical. And if not, then we can open it up for questions and discussion.
Thought you did a great job. This was very thorough.
All right. Well, yeah, I will just maybe stop sharing my screen here and so I can see everybody, and then we can just take questions. And feel free to raise your hand, come off mute, or if you want to put something in the chat, we can be monitoring that as well.
Hey, Lauren, I got a question that just came to me directly. So someone who missed the beginning of the intake form process, what is the timeline for responses along the way?
Yeah, so we are committed to sort of assigning and receiving a submission within 24 hours. So you will get a, hey, we've received this, and we're working on assigning somebody within 24 business hours, I guess I should say. If you submit something on Saturday, you probably won't hear anything till Monday. But I would say beyond that, it's really because I guess I can speak to, and the rest of the team certainly can too, the inquiries and things that we've gotten up until this point have been super varied. So I would say from submission to closeout, you've gotten your answer and you're able to move on to whatever your next steps are as a submitter. I think it's really dependent, but definitely that response within 24, one business day is something that our office is committed to doing, and being in contact with you often. And then again, the status updates as your case moves through that process, you will be kept aware of that throughout the whole process. And I don't know if anyone else on the team wants to kind of add anything there.
Yeah, if I can just add some commentary too from doing this. So far we've been in the process of doing kind of informal inquiries, right? So folks basically just asking us questions, right? And nothing in the bill really prescribes any specific timelines around kind of responsiveness. But generally speaking, for the most part, when we get asked a question, it generally takes us a couple of days to get back. Sometimes it can take longer if a question is particularly complex or it involves a very complex project that warrants a lot of discussion or details. Sometimes that can take longer depending on the context of an individual project or an individual question or set of questions that somebody's asking us. especially if we need to say like solicit legal guidance or something like that, so we can provide an informed response. But generally speaking, turnaround tends to be fast, especially for simpler questions. I will say the more formal complaint process that Lauren was kind of mentioning does have more specific timelines around it. You can look in the bill, and we actually provide this kind of in our policies and procedures document around, there's certain timelines of, how long do we have after an investigation and providing, say, if we find, say, a credibly alleged violation, and there is a violation that's occurring, there's a certain time frame by which we have to provide warning, and then there's kind of 60 days before we can really move to the next stage. So those are outlined in the bill. We talk about them more in the document. They're pretty detailed though, and there isn't like a set time frame in the same way that, say, like a local land use decision or a permit decision has a 120-day time frame. So something I'll just add as folks on the, like administering a lot of these requests up front. One thing I'd really emphasize is early engagement with us. If you have a question, it's better that we know about it sooner, because it provides us a lot more opportunity to be able to participate and respond to whatever questions or issues that you're facing, right? Generally, when we get involved at the last stage of the process, our ability to participate is very limited. So does that help answer your question? And I didn't name who asked this question, but if you feel like you want to add a follow-up, feel free to.
Oh yeah, I don't mind. Thank you, Sean. It's just the only person I could message in the chat. So was our individuals, and you're the first one that popped up. This is Roseanne with Lennar, everyone. Good afternoon. I thank you, Sean, and I just am curious, I kind of following up on that. I think that the disclaimer on the form indicated that that there would be, it would be subject to public records request. So could you outline sort of what that process looks like? Is that, anyone can ask HAPO for any inquiries and or any formal complaints that have been generated? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to speak to this to this more, but I mean, we're a public agency, and so we are subject to public records requests and disclosures, right? So one of the principles that we have in kind of our procedures is talking about when anonymity may not necessarily be possible, right? So if you're providing us kind of information related to a specific thing, right, we are subject to public records requests, so we want to make sure that we're being transparent about, all right, well, what do we have to share? When do we have to share it? What circumstances do we have to share it? That type of thing. This will become a lot more relevant, especially in the complaints process, where there are kind of different parties that are involved. But even inquiries that are submitted to us are also subject to public records. So it's something to be aware of when reaching out to us. I don't know, Joel, Lauren, if you guys want to add on to that.
No, I think you hit on it, Sean. You also I want to highlight our office's goal to be as transparent as possible in our work. So in addition to kind of navigating if there is a public record request that comes in, our team is working to identify what information is kind of appropriate to be sharing as far as like number of complaints or inquiries that our office receives, right? Or what location are those complaints or inquiries coming from? Like we could see and anticipate that sort of information is more publicly available, but not necessarily the specifics of every given inquiry or complaint, which would be, again, just how we navigate that with a more formal public records request if we come up to that. But transparency is really a foundational goal of our office in the work, and I wanted to lean into that as well in the response.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So along those lines, Joel and Sean, will there be systematic, I guess, communications from HAPO about those kind of statistics and or a frequently asked question document, perhaps, for lack of a better term, that gets distributed every X number of months or years? Like these are some very frequent inquiries that we've had, and this is how we've responded, or these are some very frequent complaints that we've had, and this is how we responded, that type of thing.
Thank you, Roseanne, for that comment. And I would say it's a little bit of a TBD, but I want to queue up Sean to talk a little bit more about HAPO's focus on guidance, technical guidance, and we have a work plan that we'll be navigating over the coming months that connects to your question. But while Sean, you're thinking about that, I also want to acknowledge that TBD of like what information we're going to be having readily available. And in some of the work of our office around navigating jurisdictions' request for exemptions to the mandatory adjustments, which is a provision of Senate Bill 1537, we took the approach of publishing, a public-facing dashboard that shows, which jurisdictions have applied. It allows for more interaction so folks can submit public comment directly through that dashboard. Allows you to link to other guidance materials in that dashboard. That's the sort of work that we want to continue as it relates to the inquiries and complaints process too. So how are we sharing out the information that we see? We're hoping to do that in a similar fashion to how we've navigated so far the requests for exemptions, for example, on those mandatory adjustments. We do have other guidance materials that we have available now, but we're going to be expanding on those and really leaning into that over the coming months. And Sean, maybe you could speak a little bit to what we envision for HAPO and producing some guidance material over the next few months.
Yeah, sure. And if I could just start from maybe a place of context. So, DLCD as an state land use agency has had a role in kind of developing guidance for local governments to implement different laws, that type of thing. Obviously, we've published many guidance documents in the past, but something about our office is specifically charged with being a resource to both local governments and developers on the application of housing laws. And in particular, what that means is we are trying as much as we can to be a repository of different housing laws and ensuring that they're accessible to local governments, to developers, that they're easy to implement, and that ultimately on the ground they're effective, right? So a big part of that, if I can articulate a little bit of a vision in the long term, is having something akin to, kind of an online resource that local governments and developers can access to understand, all right, well, what are different housing laws? What model codes exist to help me with XYZ situation? And I know also on the navigation side too, they're similarly trying to understand like what are the different agencies, policies, programs, funding sources that they implement. How can we connect folks with those types of things as well? And that's kind of the long-term vision. In the nearer term, what we do know is that there are a lot of housing laws out there, but not necessarily a lot of guidance to follow it, right? A lot of laws kind of take very specialized legal expertise to be able to implement or understand even what they do. And I think a goal of ours in the coming, months to years is basically to be a kind of resource to better implement these different types of housing laws on the ground. So developing those types of resources of, like model codes, guidance documents, FAQs about how these different laws function, and to provide information to local governments and developers to ensure that they understand how they work. I don't know if there's anything you wanted me to add to that, Joel, or if that was.
I think that's great. And yeah, I think again, our work plan now is driven by what we know is out there. As we continue to get inquiries or complaints or allegations, like that can help inform, the focus of our office on guidance material as well. So we're starting with what we know now, but look forward to be informed by those inquiries or complaints or potential allegations of housing laws that come into our office, in the coming months, years. Roseanne, hopefully that hits on a little bit of the nature of your question, but feel free to, if you have any other follow-up to that too.
Yes, thank you, it does.
Awesome. Just a note, I do have another direct message. I guess, so Lauren, I don't know if other folks are having this issue, but this person reports that they cannot hear you when you speak, that there's an echo. I'm not sure, I'm not experiencing this, but it might be the case. There's also a question as to whether Lauren is overseeing the grants. That is not the case. So HAPO is the entity that administers HAPO-related funds. So our technical assistance dollars, which, as I just mentioned, is something that we'll be administering and providing to local governments. That is a distinct fund from what the housing division also has. They have another $5 million for housing-related planning work. As we kind of mentioned at the top of this, there is an application process open. Don't worry about the funding source. Just submit whatever your application is and describe your project. And of course, the housing division and HAPO will work together to figure out, all right, which source of funding makes the most sense that based on our statutory funding authorization, that type of thing. And of course, we'll select the projects that best align with the funding allocation and of course overall program goals, which are described in the application material. So those are available. You can access it too on our website. Ethan's here also. If you have any questions that related to that, feel free to follow up if you have any additional questions. All right, we took the pause to see if there are any additional questions. I don't know if there are. I think I'm getting another one that's coming to me as a direct. Folks are not chat. You guys are welcome to raise your hands and ask questions in the chat. Like, this is odd that it's like kind of a back and forth, but let's talk about this one. So this is a question about the city of Reedsport. Is a small community under 5,000 persons. They utilize a Muni code and need a short sheet of housing, and the SB impact our community. I don't fully understand this question or if it's a comment. Do you want to speak more to whoever sent this inquiry to Ethan?
Hi, this is Steve Wilson with Reedsport.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm hoping, with the number of bills that came through here in the last month, our Municode is just, the typical Municode that those, small communities adopt.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, we're receiving a lot of message that, that with these changes, that we're going to need to update the code again here in the near, with these legislative changes. Does HAPO have for the small community, because a lot of times, these don't impact us.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of safeguarded as, small, financially tight little towns. And so that we're excluded from the code changes. But does your organization have a document or have put together any information of the impacts on the small communities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I can speak to that. And I think to your point, I think a longer term goal that I kind of expressed with the guidance is having a clear understanding of like, all right, which laws affect which communities, right? Oftentimes laws have population thresholds that, apply to certain size communities, but maybe not others, or apply in certain locations, but not others. And so that is important. And yes, you're right, as a city of 5,000, or a city less than 5,000, only some laws are in effect for the city of Reedsport and not all of them. Now, I will say, as it relates to this recent legislative session in 2025, there have been a series of bills that were passed that do affect different cities, including the city of Reedsport. It's not as necessarily impactful as it might be for large cities, but different provisions changed over time or changed throughout this legislative session. So one of the documents that we're actually going to be working on kind of in the near term is basically a debrief of what those laws were, what that means for different communities of different sizes, what are the timelines for implementation, what can you expect to maybe come later on, what needs to be implemented now, that type of thing. And that's something that we're going to be preparing in the coming months. So we will be publishing that as it comes along. I think ideally, again, right, the goal is to have something akin to an online kind of hub where we can provide this information. For now, it'll be PDFs that we kind of produce this guidance on, but we'll be releasing that later, probably in early fall. I guess the thing to keep in mind is we too are also the folks who have to react to legislative session, and session just ended like a week ago. So we need some time to be able to digest the bills and provide accurate guidance. So does that help answer your question, Steve?
It does. Thank you very much.
Sean, if I
Ethan,
could,
yeah,
yeah,
please
thanks,
do.
Joel. I just also wanted to highlight too, for folks in that category of a cohort of jurisdictions that are 2,500 population to 10,000 population. Part of the House bill that just passed in the 25 session, House Bill 2138 related to middle housing, would be, I think, is what you're speaking to, Steve, in terms of, you know, the changes that you might have to go back and update. But I also wanted to highlight that part of that bill did allocate technical assistance dollars to the housing division to help local governments go through those code updates. So in terms of seeking both the technical assistance in terms of the dollars and the technical assistance in terms of the advice, both of those can be, you know, that's what DLCD Housing Division and HAPO is here to facilitate, both the advice and the financial support to update those codes.
All right. I think we'll, you know, Steve, unless you have any follow-ups, maybe we open it back up for other types of questions. I also got a note from our folks on legislative team that they'll also be publishing a high-level document of laws passed in the 2025 session. Of course, we'll provide more detailed technical guidance to follow that later on. But yeah, we can open it back up. And yeah, please raise your hands. You know, please feel free to ask us a question in person or like virtually. That would be awesome.
And while folks are thinking about those questions, you know, this is, I think, our third open forum as a HAPO, the Housing Accountability and Production Office, and following kind of the lead of the Housing Division, where they're hosting open forums on every even numbered month, and the Housing Accountability and Production Office is hosting these open forums on the odd numbered months. And while we are bringing, you know, a topic specific in our presentation, we really want to just create the space where folks can get to know members of our team and have a you know, this more informal opportunity to engage with us and ask questions of our team along the way. So really appreciate you all joining, and hopefully you feel welcome and to ask the questions that you may have globally about our office, or if you want to dive into the topic that we brought forward today or at future open forums, please feel free to use this time as you best see fit. And I'm channeling a colleague, Andy, who's on here, of like how many seconds of awkward silence can we handle as a group before we move on? But we'll hang on here a little bit longer in the case folks have additional questions. Roseanne, yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess just one comment and then I'll ask a question. I think that because it's so new and you guys were just formally launched, you know, that might be part of the reason for lack of questions. But then I guess a good segue from that comment is, you know, can you provide any examples of inquiries or complaints that have come in that might get folks' juices flowing about, you know, other questions to ask you and your office colleagues? Because really without, well, I think I would just say it positively that, you know, with some of those examples, that might be a helpful way for us to understand even better how your office works, and sort of what the initial, I know it was informal the first 6 months or so, but initially how you might have responded to something. And that's partly why I asked about the public records, like, and or what kind of communications you'll have. Is like, we don't really know how you've responded to things that have come in already. So that might be, if you could take an example or two, that would be awesome.
Sure. Yeah, maybe Lauren, you and I can both go into detail, just like an example that we've heard or that we fielded. Again, it's in a informal context, right? So just connecting people with resources, that type of thing. And we can kind of connect that to our broader, direction under statute. So I'll start. And one thing I should note is that we get inquiries from both local governments and developers. These inquiries can kind of come from both places. But I think really kind of our goal and what I think helps illustrate this was an example that came to us from the city of Grants Pass pretty recently with their Middle Housing Land Division. I know we actually have a planner from Grants Pass on the line, so I understand that, but it's a great illustrative example of something that happened. But basically, this was a situation where the city reached out to us with some questions related to the Middle Housing Land Division, and it turned out that the city did not have it codified, this statute that requires granting middle housing land divisions for certain qualifying middle housing applications. The idea being that you could divide it and sell the lots or sell the units fee simple to folks, right? So that way you could support home ownership of middle housing that's built. And, basically, in addition to kind of providing guidance to the city about how that works, the implementation of the statute in lieu of having kind of a code adopted, but we were also able to kind of connect them to say, hey, we have these resources available here that can help codify this and ensure that we are facilitating middle housing land divisions on the ground. We know that's something that you guys are facing at the development counter. And so to kind of provide the resources to bridge that gap, to ensure that the city is, kind of substantially in conformance with the law. And then, of course, to ideally see middle housing development and see home ownership of those middle housing developments on the ground. So that's an example of one that we fielded. We expect that to become much more routine, where we have outreach from local governments and developers related to specific housing laws. Really, we're going to be leading first and foremost with the resources necessary for that local government to do that and to facilitate production, right? So that's an example in the housing law, and it can, in this case, it came from the local government themselves, but of course, this can come from also housing developers as well. And just one last thing too, I'll just add here is a lot of the outreach that we've seen on middle housing land divisions, informed in part by Grants Pass, but also by other communities, is like, oh, hey, this would be a great idea to have a model code that is specifically for implementing this statute, right? So that way cities have something that they can look to say, oh, this is a model code that I can use to apply in lieu of me having my own code adopted, right? And so we're actually working on that. We have a model code. We just published a draft of that earlier last month, not this month, that includes a chapter on middle housing land divisions that we intend to be a resource for cities. So that way they don't have to kind of keep up with these statutory changes and try to codify everything on their own. They'll be able to apply these resources that are provided by the HAPO. So that's what I'll say on the housing law side. Lauren, I don't know if you want to speak to the navigation side.
Yeah, I'll speak to one that we're working on right now. We have a affordable housing developer who came to us. They had completed their environmental review on their project, realized they had a funding gap, and came in for some additional Oregon Housing Community Services funding that had a slightly different environmental requirement. And so they were really, we're still in the process, but developer really needed help kind of getting clarity on the differences in those regulations compared to their environmental review that they had already completed. And so we're helping navigate that process with OHCS and DEQ to get clarity so that developer can move forward with a mitigation strategy for some environmental concerns that helps them hit their timelines, and also trying to reduce cost overrun where we can as well. So that's one we're working on the housing navigation side right now.
Thanks, Lauren and Sean, for giving a couple of those examples. And as Lauren mentioned early on in our presentation, our office is, it's a joint office with our colleagues at the Building Codes Division. So we heard just kind of a couple of examples of inquiries that have come in that are, DLCD focused, with our team. And I know we have at least one colleague joining us this afternoon. I don't necessarily want to put him on the spot, but give an opportunity if you want to give an example. A colleague from Building Codes, if you want to give an example of an inquiry that you've navigated or that your team has navigated, Andy, feel free to do that. But at minimum, I just wanted to acknowledge that It could also be an inquiry around the housing laws that are associated with building codes. And that would be, of course, the building code division that would be following up on that inquiry or concern.
Yeah, the vast majority of the inquiries that come in that like, and been handling these types of questions for a while, but it's things on like applications of specific technical provisions of the building code will go to one of our technical experts. There's also things like permitting administration or fees that building departments can charge. Like all of those can potentially come in through the building department or the building codes division.
I'll follow up on that. Last forum, or one of the previous forums, there was a question related to engineering review and the impact that engineering review has on the issuance of building permits or the issuance of, land use permits, and or both. Have you had any further thoughts on how CAPO can have an impact in that realm, the engineering realm?
Joel, yeah, please feel free.
What, actually, I know Ryan and Andy, both from on our team here, and have been navigating the request for proposals on really the process improvement study that HAPO is charged with conducting over the next few months. So I'm excited for that work to commence. And it is a process improvement study and report that is due to the legislature in September of 2026. So we've worked in partnership with Building Codes Division and DLCD to issue a joint request for proposals for contractors that can help us produce this report that is focused on process improvement studies and would highlight issues such as the example that you brought up, and opportunities for improvement in that part of the housing production process. Andy, Ryan, please feel free to jump in here if you'd like to add any more context to the process improvement study that we're working on.
I think that's good.
Or Sean, too, if you had anything. But I think that the point being right now, engineering, it's not part of the universe of housing laws that is necessarily the responsibility of our office. However, we are interested in this research and evaluation work and really getting a better understanding of what are the impacts and barriers to the housing production process, and how can we make recommendations to that increase efficiencies and decrease costs and get us to the point, the common goal of boosting housing production across the state. So that process improvement study is a venue for really leaning in and trying to understand what those barriers may be and how we could make recommendations for improvement.
Indeed, I'm thinking of something like, I think it was Senate Bill 974 that was passed, right? That established the shot clock for engineering review. Told, of course, but there might be some jurisdictions that don't necessarily have the resources to do that right away, and then maybe there'd be an inquiry about that, or how that works in terms of, is that considered a housing law? Maybe a private developer or nonprofit developer might ask that question. Have you anticipated anything in that regard?
Yeah, so let me just start with the statutory context of housing laws versus the Section 5 side of the report. So the Section 5 is right, like how do these requirements, or specifically just how does engineering, public facilities planning, how does that intersect with housing production, and what recommendations can our office make through this report for basically improving that process? Senate Bill 974, for those who are unfamiliar, this was a bill that was passed by the Oregon legislature that includes different parameters around, among other things, around engineering timelines. So it does establish a shot clock. Whether it's a housing law actually depends on where it's codified, because housing laws are a specific set of laws that are identified in Senate Bill 1537 that relate to housing production. It includes all of ORS, sorry for being technical, ORS Chapter 197A and parts of Chapter 197, but they're specified in the bill. The problem is if this law is not specified as a housing law, we do not have statutory authority over it. So if somebody's trying to say, hey, well, there's a shot clock parameter X, Y, and Z, if it's not specifically defined on our technical definition of what a housing law is, we won't have any authority to really do anything about it. So that's why I was kind of emphasizing that at the top, like what the term housing law is actually a very important legal term for defining our scope as an office. And if an issue, and I'm not 100% sure if this is codified as a housing law or not, but if it's not included in that definition, we don't have authority over it. So just keep that in mind. I have a question that relates to the grant. So this one is, please respond if UGB management agreement work with the city and county involved would be something that is related to housing so that it is covered by the grant. Ethan, I think this would be a great question for you.
I think so too. Thanks, Sean. So the work that is allowed under well, let me back up. The prioritization for the housing planning technical assistance dollars are projects that local governments are statutorily obligated to complete. So housing capacity analysis, housing production strategy on the schedule by which is adopted by commission. So that's number one priority. Number two priority are projects that are planning for housing where there's housing need. So where need has been established, or there's a kind of like generally that falls into the bucket of like follow-up work. And then third is the broad category of like where everything else would fit into, but generally focused on projects that would facilitate equitable outcomes in housing. And so that work of an urban growth management agreement probably falls into that, like generally that second category. So that's important to note. I would also say that the statutory authority for DLCD to expend those funds or allocate those funds to projects has to be dedicated to housing. Like there has to be a housing nexus for that project. And so those are the the many different criteria that we're balancing when we're considering which projects. But generally, yes. Is it a first priority? No. And it must have a connection to housing. Probably more than you bargained for there, but hopefully that answers the question.
Do a final call for any general questions folks may have. for us. I know we can hang on here for a few more minutes if, in case there are additional questions. And again, a reminder that we intend to continue these open forums every other month for the HAPO specific open forum. Housing team has their open forum the other month that HAPO is not doing our open forum. So encourage you to continue to engage with us in that open forum or in other ways. We shared some links in the chat of today's open forum. I'll ask a teammate to drop, actually I think I can do it, drop the team email in here as well if there are questions that come up, but really want to encourage folks, if it is suitable and it works for you, to please use that common intake form for any specific questions, complaints, or navigation requests of our office. So I'll drop that team email in the chat as well. Thank you all to the HAPO folks. Sean, do you have any more coming in your chat? Any questions that have come to you?
No, none yet.
All right. Well, again, thanks, Emily, for adding the HAPO team email address in the chat. Thanks again for joining us this afternoon. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Everybody.